Sophie Ridge from Sky News recently sat down with Keir Starmer for a one-on-one interview. While much of their conversation focused on Starmer's personal story, there were also some moments of political substance. In particular, the Labour leader was quizzed about whether his numbers add up.
I want you to be honest with people. What are you going to do? Are you going to become the austerity Prime Minister if you win the election?
Be an awful inheritance if we're privileged enough to come into power. They've damaged the economy, they've damaged our public services, and we have to change that. I ran a public service, so I don't need anybody to tell me how important it is that our public services are properly supported and properly funded. We have to ensure that we've got an economy that is thriving, because at the bottom of all of this is the fact the economy has been stagnant for 14 years.
I know you want to grow the economy,
So
but that's not going to happen on day one. I want Sheffield Wednesday to win the Premier League. I know it's not going to happen this season.
But there's a lot of things we can do very quickly. Changing the planning regulations and rules can be done very, very quickly.
Councils are going bust.
National Wealth Fund.
Councils are going bust now.
Yes.
There's a 5.5 year, and I know you'll care about this, there's a 5.5 year average wait from a rape being committed to that person seeing justice. What are you going to do straight away if you're number 10? Be honest. Are you going to borrow more? Or are you going to enact austerity?
Well, where we are going to be able to put money into our public services, we've been clear that we'll do that. So when it comes to the NHS, 2 million reduction in the waiting lists by the scheme that we've got to work 24/7. With our schools,
I'm not talking
getting
about the
rid
initial,
of VAT so we can put more teachers into our schools
1.7 billion
desperately
pounds.
needed.
IFS is 20 billion pounds in public services, and you're not being honest about what you're going to do. This is your chance. Tell people.
We need to ensure that the economy is growing. We can turn
It's
that
not
around.
going to happen on day one.
Please, just hear me out.
It's
Before
not
telling me
it's not.
Planning can be changed very, very quickly. That will have a massive impact on growth. The second thing is our National Wealth Fund, which will bring in private investment. I talk to private investors all of the time, and they say to me, Keir, we've got the money to invest right now in your country, but we're not going to do that because we don't see the stability. We don't see the conditions in which we're going to invest.
Notice there that Starmer talks about the National Wealth Fund, which by the way, will need money. You can't just have a National Wealth Fund. We'll invest in places, but we won't capitalise it with any money. He conflates the National Wealth Fund with stability. They're two separate things, Sir Keir. And that really underscores how this was a completely meandering, meaningless answer. 5 years from somebody being raped to getting justice, 5 years, what will you do? I'll change planning laws. Okay. Starmer proceeded to talk about the scale of the challenge Labour stands to inherit.
We are going to inherit a really badly damaged economy after 14 years of failure. Our job is to pick it up, stand it back up, and move our country forward. And I'm not going to shy away from that or provide easy answers to that.
Or not any answers.
We've got to grow our economy. Now, you may say that's not an answer you like. I say it's the only answer.
It's a long-term answer, but it's not telling me what you're going to do.
Well, I don't think that it is going to take that long to get our economy going. I think we can turn it around very, very quickly. But what I'm not going to do is make the mistake of saying that, or pretending there are easy answers, unfunded spending commitments are what Liz Truss installed on the country, and we're all paying the price. Last week, you saw in that budget, at the very end, staggeringly, the Chancellor announced £46 billion of an unfunded commitment to get rid of national insurance. We're not going to make that mistake because in the end, who pays the price for that? It's working people, and I'm not going to allow that to happen under a Labour government.
It's really important that we're honest about what Labour stands to inherit. That's pretty much the only moment, I think, of insight from Keir Starmer over the whole 18-minute interview, particularly after the latest budget. Indeed, following that budget last week, Citibank, the American bank, said Britain would struggle to achieve its growth targets and that productivity growth would remain at around 0.5%. If productivity doesn't go up, growth doesn't go up, taxes don't go up, you get the picture. And that's enough to worsen the borrowing outlook by around 30 to 35 billion pounds, if Citibank are correct. In fact, City economist Benjamin Novara said the UK could be, quote, fiscally offside by around 50 to 60 billion pounds, falling to 15 to 20 billion if bonds rally as we currently expect. In other words, best case scenario, Hunt's numbers are out by 15 billion So it's no surprise that the Resolution Foundation called that budget fiscal fiction. Fiscal fiction. Then there's the fact that dozens of councils around the country face going bankrupt. It's already happening in Birmingham. So even just to keep us where we presently are, which isn't a great place, a Labour government would have to find tens of billions of extra cash. That's before investing in the NHS or building infrastructure. Now, it's not all bad. For instance, Labour can reverse the recent national insurance cuts by the Tories. National insurance went down from 12 to 10%. It'll now go down to 8%. That's a start. Only there's one problem with that. They've claimed they won't do it. And on additional money going into the NHS, which Keir Starmer talked about there, so Keir, that was coming from a tax on non-doms. The Tories have just nicked that tax and it's paying for the national insurance cuts. Deeply unserious responses from a deeply unserious man. And I really sympathise with Sophy Ridge when she says, come on. He's saying there are no easy answers. There were no answers. Michael, what's your read on that interview and Keir Starmer's 2 minutes there, really, which I think in many ways the most revealing 2 minutes he's offered so far in terms of how he'll govern?
I mean, it was good she got him to be explicit about what the plan is, right? So the plan is basically, well, we do forget as well, actually, because not much extra money for public services, right? But as the IFS have shown, what the current budget from the Tories sort of implies, and if Labour are going to go along with those spending plans, actually we're going to see another £20 billion in cuts to unprotected services. So that's not health or education. So there will be further austerity if Labour do what they say they're going to do. In terms of the sort of longer term issue, sort of the 5-year plan, she has got them to explicitly say, our growth plan is this, right? Our growth plan is planning reform. Our growth plan is a national wealth fund, which won't really be capitalised with much public money. But Keir Starmer is assured that international investors will pump enough money into the economy to make that happen because of stability. So those are the two ones, aren't they? And I'd like to see that modelled, really. Because before it was a bit, it's less vague than it used to be. He said we want growth and sort of ended. We want growth and we're going to get there by planning reform and we're going to get there by having some international investment because we offer stability. Maybe, can we see that fleshed out, right? Can we see some modelling? Can we see an academic paper or a paper from a think tank that sort of really does suggest that those two policies, there are only two policies, right? It's not a particularly ambitious plan, but these two policies, could that really up growth by 1% a year? Or an amount which would be significant enough that you can keep to the same fiscal rules whilst not having a completely collapsed justice system, completely collapsed local councils. Because, by the way, those are both things which are outside of those protected areas. So those would expect, those £20 billion in annual cuts would be expected to hit local authorities and justice. So, yeah, we're closer to, I don't want to call it a plan because I think that would be overstating it. We're closer to some honesty about what the promise is. Now, can we see any particular reason why we should believe that's remotely plausible, that those two policies would lead to enough growth that public services aren't still due to collapse?
I think that's right. But what I would say, Michael, is that, look, Keir Starmer is clearly moving to a place now where he's not offering, the moon on a stick, right? But like I said earlier, I think just to stand still, you're probably going to have to reverse these national insurance tax cuts, which, by the way, that's very easy to do because it's only just been sort of people aren't, assuming that money's there. And that's a lot of money. You're looking at tens of billions of pounds from that. And by the way, I think they'll do that. I think they're going to have to do it. And I find this whole sort of argument so stupid. We're not going to lie to people, blah, blah. You're going to have to increase some taxes from somewhere. You are lying to people. And if you don't, it goes back to your point about local government, Michael, council tax will go up. Council tax will go up. If you're not going to increase taxes at a national level somewhere, and you're going to continue to underfund councils and they're facing bankruptcy, business rates and council tax will go up. Now, I don't know how good your growth model is. We're going to get growth. We're going for growth. if you're going to have businesses bludgeoned by business rates being increased, by the way, Labour have committed to reforming business rates. Again, if you're going to get rid of business rates, where's the money going to come from? And my mother-in-law, Michael, I think she's a very wise woman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. She said, look, the Tories talk about tax cuts, but then your council tax goes up. They rob Peter to pay Paul. And I feel like, if the Tories weren't so remiss in that department, that would be a useful line of attack against the Labour Party, And I feel like we are headed towards permanent dysfunction in local government because at a national level, no political party is being honest about the need to increase some taxes. I wouldn't increase tax on working people. I would increase capital gains, for instance. They won't be honest about that. So, of course, councils have to increase council tax. Well, let them be hated. What's your read on that? Do you think we'd see a big rise in council tax? And how might Labour respond?
Money has to come from somewhere, right? So either it's the case that planning reform and some international investors having new confidence because Keir Starmer's got a nice haircut, right? Either that brings around really intense growth, or taxes are going to have to be increased at a national or a local level, as you say, or they're going to have to change the sort of statutory obligations of councils. So councils at the moment, I think about 70% of their budgets goes on older people that need care, adult social care, and then children who have sort of extra needs. So councils are responsible for sort of getting them to special education schools. And this is sort of costing them lots of money. In part, I think, because there's a bit of some monopoly power when it comes to the service providers. So I suppose they could do something about that. But I think either you're going to have taxes increasing somewhere, or you're going to have services declining and actually statutory obligations of councils falling. So literally saying, okay, it was the case that you had to provide X, Y, Z for kids with learning difficulties. We're going to take away the Z. You just have to provide X, Y. Like, that's the only way you're going to make it work, unless all of these councils end up going bust. So I suppose it's, pick your poison. And yeah, Labour aren't being honest because they're saying we can have it all because suddenly we're going to get sort of Chinese style growth because of some planning reform.
Yeah, there's one comment here saying council tax is going up. I know, but you said 10%. Generally speaking, it's hard to push it above 5%. You need certain measures taking place. My point is, you ain't seen nothing yet, okay? Because if you continue to underfund local services, everybody is going to see council tax rises like they're about to see in Birmingham, 20% over 18 months. 20%. Not 5%, 20%. And that won't be the end of it. Because, of course, if you're caring for older people with an aging population, it ain't going south, is it? Finally, on Starmer, the Times published this story. Revealed Keir Starmer's plan to revolutionise the way Britain is governed. The party leader has plans for a powerful new executive cabinet and mission boards to focus on his priorities after the general election. Now, the short of this is that Starmer will create these mission boards to monitor progress for Labour's missions, things like net zero growth. And that executive cabinet will make key decisions in advance of them being presented to the cabinet proper. It will consist of Keir Starmer, obviously, Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner, and Pat McFadden. Keir Starmer also intends to create a new policy delivery unit reporting directly to him, very presidential, which would concentrate on his priorities across Whitehall. He's also considering appointing a senior business figure to run that unit. Michael, there's some things I like about this. I think we should centralise more power in the Prime Minister. I think we should give some power away. We should devolve lots of power to regions, to cities. But I think where national government is tasked to do things, it should be accountable for them and deliver them. Is this showing how serious Starmer is about governing? Because on the one hand, talking to Sophy Ridge, he doesn't sound very serious. And then you read something like this and you think, okay, there's a bit of a strategy here about how to execute.
I mean, in a way, the Labour Party are just trying to work out what can we possibly put in our manifesto that isn't going to cost any extra money, and this isn't going to cost any extra money. So, there's a very simple explanation as to why we're hearing this now, right? I don't necessarily think this is sort of they thought, what is the thing that we can do to bring about growth, and they've decided it's this. This is going to be the key to growth. I think they're like, what can we promise? We need some announcements. We can't spend any money, and this is a cheap thing to do. I suppose if you do want to look on the bright side, potentially you could argue that one of the reasons why nothing is working in Britain at the moment is partly because we had this false dogma of austerity, which seems to sort of be hanging around, unfortunately. but also the Tory party have just been stagnant and obsessed with internal fights for a number of years now. So nothing really works. You know, you're looking at Dominic Cummings' Twitter. I never know how much to believe the guy, but he's sort of saying, you know, he tried to go in there, big plans, big projects, and everyone was too busy with factional infighting or sort of stagnant myopia that we couldn't get it done. So if you wanted to look on the bright side, you could say maybe getting a new bunch of guys in there who have been thinking about this for a while. They shouldn't really be sort of angling as to who's going to be the next leader as obsessively as they are in the Conservative Party. Maybe just that little bit of new energy and momentum will make governance a bit more effective than it has been for the past 5 years or so. But yeah, I mean, we're somewhat clutching at straws here, but I want to end on a positive.
They will be better than the Tories. Quickly, to finish on this story, the subtext for me is that they're taking on the Treasury. You know, if all of a sudden you're centralising power at number 10, it sounds like you're taking power away from the Treasury. Well, I find this really interesting because, of course, you've had this story about the OBR will basically sign off on Labour policy. If it makes sense for the OBR, it happens. If it doesn't happen. I think that's ridiculous, but there you go, government by Quango. This sounds at odds with that because you're saying not government by Quango, we're centralising executive power at number 10. Very interesting, very interesting. We've not detected any tensions between Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, but that's interesting. That number 10, number 11 conflict, it hints at that.